Hello students, welcome to the lecture of structure of atom. Till now we have discussed about the subatomic particles, electron, proton and neutron, and how they were discovered. And we have discussed about two atomic models that were discovered earlier. One was Dalton's atomic theory and the second one was Thomson's plum pudding model or watermelon model. Next we will study about Rutherford's nuclear model of atom. Rutherford's model was the first atomic model which is quite similar to the modern concept of atom. Before moving on to that concept, we will have some quick revision about the backgrounds. So, atoms have mostly three subatomic particles: electron, proton and neutron. So, electron was discovered by J.J. Thomson by the cathode ray experiment. And proton was discovered by Goldstein through the anode ray experiment. These two experiments were opposite of each other, but the experimental setup was quite similar. So, there was a glass tube where there were two metal electrodes connected with a battery, and one gas was taken like hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. There were various gases through which the experiment was conducted, and the system was maintained at low pressure and high voltage. The observations for these two experiments were opposite of each other, but they had similar results. So, in these experiments, there was a glass tube with a vacuum pump and two electrodes were there connected through battery. Okay. If this is the positive terminal of the battery, the electrode connected to it should be positive, which is the anode, and for negative terminal the electrode connected should be negative, that is the cathode. So, we had seen that for cathode ray experiment, when we take some gas, it splits up to give cations and electrons. The electrons were utilized for the cathode ray experiment. They were known as cathode ray particles initially. So, for cathode ray experiment, since electrons are negatively charged, they will move towards the positive electrode. And in this case, the anode was perforated and the back wall was coated with a fluorescent compound which was zinc sulfide, and when the electron moved through the anode and hit on the zinc sulfide wall, bright spot was seen. Similar experiment was repeated for the discovery of protons, that was called anode ray. These positive ions were positively charged, so they moved towards the cathode. In this case, the wall behind the cathode was coated with zinc sulfide, and similarly bright spot was obtained here. But the crucial difference that was observed was that The cathode ray particles for all gases were same. These particles were called electrons. While for the anode ray, something was different. For anode ray, these particles, they were actually cations. Only H plus is proton. Others are not proton. This is to be remembered. Not proton. So, proton is the unit positively charged subatomic particle. One thing I didn't mention in the last class was that these anode ray particles were also called canal rays. Why? Because we have seen that the mass of proton is equal to 1.673 into 10 to the power minus 27 kg, whereas the mass of electron is 9.1 into 10 to the power minus 31 kg. So, electrons are much smaller than protons. Since protons are bigger and proton is just H plus, so other cations like N plus, O plus, they were much bigger than H plus ion. So, for these bigger particles to penetrate the cathode needed bigger perforations as compared to the anode in case of discovery of electron. Since they had bigger perforations, these were called canals. So, these cations were called canal rays. Okay. So, this was about electron and proton. How were neutrons discovered? Neutrons were discovered by Chadwick. By bombarding beryllium sheets with alpha particles. So, what was alpha particle? We had discussed about 3 types of particles which were emitted by radioactive compounds. 3 types of rays actually. Alpha particles are helium ions with a +2 charge. Beta particles were electrons, which are written as this, and the third one were gamma rays. Gamma rays are not particles, they are electromagnetic radiations. So, neutrons were discovered by the bombardment of beryllium sheets with alpha particles. As a result, we got a carbon atom and another particle. So, if we equate the mass numbers, we get 9 plus 4 equal to 13. So, it should be 12 plus 1. So, this new particle that was found, it should have a mass of 1, and if we equate the charges, 4 plus 2 equal to 6. So, this new particle should have a charge of 0. So, this was the neutron with mass 1 and charge 0. Neutrons were neutral particles. So, now we have 3 subatomic particles: electron, proton and neutron. So, the charge of neutron is 0, but for electron and proton, for electron the charge is minus 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 coulomb, and for proton the charge is plus 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 coulomb. So, together electron and proton make the atom neutral. In the last lecture, we had studied about Thomson's atomic model, which was Thomson's plum pudding model or watermelon model. So, what was there in this atomic model? Thomson had proposed the atom to be a sphere where electrons are embedded like the seeds of a watermelon, and the sphere had uniform positive charge. Electrons were embedded and this was uniform sphere, uniform positive sphere. But this model had very clear drawbacks. The first one was the mass should be equal distributed then. Also, couldn't explain the movement of electrons. Although Thomson himself had discovered electrons, but this model couldn't explain the movement of electrons. Thomson's discovery of electron was based on the movement of electrons from cathode to anode. But in Thomson's plum pudding model, the electrons were embedded within an atom. So, it was not possible for the electrons to move out of the atoms or ionize the atoms. So, this model was rejected, and another major factor was that after the discovery of neutron, this atomic model couldn't explain the existence of neutrons in it. So, later on, when Rutherford carried out the alpha particle scattering experiment, this model was altogether rejected. So, now we will study about the Rutherford alpha scattering experiment. So, in this experiment, this was performed by Ernest Rutherford. He had taken a gold foil, a very thin gold foil, and bombarded it with alpha particles. He had surrounded the gold foil with a circular fluorescent ring of zinc sulphide, and the positions where the alpha particles hit on the zinc sulphide wall were noted, and that helped in constructing a model for atom. So, next we will see Rutherford's alpha scattering experiment. Okay, so here he had taken first of all an alpha particle source. Alpha particle source. So what can be an alpha particle source? Radioactive elements. Radioactive elements. He had tried mostly radium and polonium. And secondly, there was a gold foil around 10 to the power minus 4 millimeter thick, which is around 100 nanometer thick. But why gold? Why not any other metal? Because of the high malleability of the gold. Since this was a very thin foil, so some metal should be taken which can be formed into this type of thin sheets. Since the malleability and ductility of gold is almost highest among the metals, so gold was preferred. So now we will see what was the experimental setup looked like. The experimental setup looked like this. Okay, first let me draw, then I'll explain. There was a lead box and there was some hole in it, and some radioactive particles were put in the box, that is alpha particle source was present inside the box and it emitted alpha rays which passed through the hole, and there was this gold foil. Okay, and it was circulated with zinc sulfide screen. Okay, in between this there was one lead plate with a small slit in it. Why was it kept? I will explain. First of all, what's the use of the lead box? So, a lead box is used to keep the radioactive element free from external contact, because every heavier radioactive elements, they decay to convert into lead ultimately, because lead is non-radioactive and stable. So, heavier radioactive particles are stored in lead box. Also, if they are not stored in lead box, then the alpha rays will be emitted in every direction. To direct the alpha rays in a particular direction, they were kept inside the lead box and a hole was made so that the rays will be emitted only through the hole. And the lead plate with the small slit was also kept to minimize further deviation. So, alpha rays hit on the gold foil and there were very interesting observations. If this is the zinc sulfide wall and this is the gold foil, when alpha rays acted on it, some of the rays hit on the zinc sulfide undeflected, some of them deflected in smaller angles and some bounced back. We will now study about why these difference in deflections occur. Thank you.